Family Feud was rolling like any other episode. The lights were bright, the audience was clapping, and Steve Harvey was doing what he does best, cracking jokes, throwing out that signature smile, making everyone feel at home. But then something happened. Something nobody in that studio, not the producers, not the crew, not even Steve himself, saw coming. The game stopped. The laughter faded. And in the middle of a question about what makes a family strong, an elderly grandfather stepped up to the microphone and said something so powerful, so raw, that Steve Harvey froze. His smile disappeared. His eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in his decades-long career, Steve Harvey had no words. What that grandfather said in those 90 seconds didn't just change the game. It changed everyone in that room. And it's about to change you too. It was a Tuesday afternoon taping at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The energy was high. Two families stood on opposite sides of the stage, buzzing with excitement, ready to compete for the cash prize. On the left, the Morgan family, a loud, spirited crew from Mississippi, all matching blue shirts and big personalities. On the right, the Parker family from Ohio, a quieter group, but you could feel the love between them. And at the center of it all stood Steve Harvey, mic in hand, reading the question off the card with that mischievous grin he's known for. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced, pacing the stage like he owned it. "Top 7 answers are on the board. Name something that makes a family strong." The crowd erupted in applause. It was a feel-good question, the kind that gets people thinking about home, about love, about the people who matter most. The Morgans buzzed in first. "Communication!" shouted the youngest daughter, barely 19, full of energy. Ding. Number 3. The audience cheered. Steve nodded, tossed out a quick joke about how his own family never listened to him, and moved on to the Parkers. That's when he appeared. Harold Parker. 73 years old. White hair combed neatly to the side. Plaid shirt tucked into khaki pants. Glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to steal the spotlight. But when he stepped up to that podium, something shifted. You could feel it. The way he stood there, calm, grounded, like he'd lived 1,000 lifetimes and learned something most people never do. Steve looked at him, smiled, and said, "All right, Harold, what do you think makes a family strong?" Harold paused. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he did. And he knew it wasn't going to be what anyone expected. But what Harold said next didn't just answer the question. It stopped the entire show. He leaned into the microphone, his voice steady but filled with something deep, something aching. "Forgiveness," he said. The board flipped. Ding. Number 1. The audience erupted. Steve clapped, smiled, started to move to the next player. But Harold didn't step back. He stayed right there at the podium, his hand resting on the edge, his eyes locked on Steve. And then he said, "Can I tell you why?" Steve stopped. The producers in the booth tensed. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how the game worked. But Steve Harvey isn't the kind of man who cuts someone off when they have something real to say. He lowered his cards, turned fully toward Harold, and said, "Go ahead, sir." The studio went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are waiting for a punchline. The kind of quiet where everyone knows something sacred is about to happen. Harold took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice cracked just slightly. "I lost my son 4 years ago," he began. The air in the room changed instantly. He was 39. Heart attack. No warning. One day he was here, the next day he was gone. You could hear people in the audience gasp softly. Steve's face shifted. The smile was gone. His jaw tightened. His eyes locked onto Harold's. "And I'll be honest with you, Steve," Harold continued, his voice trembling now. "I wasn't always the best father. I worked too much. I missed games. I missed recitals. I thought providing was enough. I thought being there physically was the same as being there emotionally. And by the time I realized I was wrong, my son was grown. We had years where we barely spoke. Years where I thought maybe we'd never fix it. The studio was silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. Cameras kept rolling, but nobody dared make a sound. But 3 months before he passed, Harold said, his eyes now glistening with tears, we had a conversation. A real one. And he told me he forgave me. He said, Dad, I know you did the best you could. And I forgave him too. For all the times he shut me out. For all the times he pushed me away. We forgave each other. And those last 3 months, those were the best 3 months of my life. Steve Harvey stood frozen. His hand was pressed against his chest. His eyes were red. He wasn't crying yet, but you could see he was fighting it. Harold's voice grew stronger now, steadier, like he was speaking not just to Steve, but to everyone in that room, everyone watching at home. That's why I said forgiveness, Steve. Because love isn't enough if you can't forgive. Family isn't strong because you never hurt each other. It's strong because when you do, you find a way back. You find forgiveness. And that's what holds you together when everything else falls apart. The silence in the studio was deafening. And then, slowly, someone in the audience started clapping. Then another. Then another. And within seconds the entire studio was on its feet. The Morgans, the opposing family, walked across the stage and hugged the Parkers. Steve Harvey stood there, hands still on his chest, tears now streaming down his face. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't crack a joke to break the tension. He just stood there, took it in, and let the moment be what it was. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. After a long moment, Steve walked over to Harold. He didn't say anything at first. He just put his hand on the old man's shoulder and squeezed. Then he pulled him into a hug. A real one. The kind that says, I see you. I hear you. And what you just shared matters. The audience roared. People were crying openly now. Even the crew members wiped their eyes. Steve finally pulled back, looked Harold in the eyes, and said, Thank you, sir. Thank you for reminding us what this is all about. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the audience, his voice still thick with emotion, and said, Y'all, this is why I do this show. Not for the money. Not for the laughs. For moments like this. Because every now and then, somebody walks onto this stage and reminds us what really matters. He looked back at Harold. You just did that, sir. You just did that. The producers tried to get the show back on track. They cued Steve to move to the next round. But Steve waved them off. He wasn't ready. He turned to the Parker family, standing there together, all of them crying now, and he said, Tell me about your son. Tell me about the man he was. And Harold did. For the next 5 minutes, on national television, in the middle of a game show, Harold Parker told the story of his son. His laughter. His love for fishing. His terrible singing voice. His kindness. The way he always made time for his kids even when life got hard. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He told the crew to keep rolling. He told them not to cut. This wasn't about the game anymore. This was about something bigger. And when Harold finished talking, Steve did something nobody saw coming. He took off his jacket. His signature, perfectly tailored, 3-piece suit jacket. And he draped it over Harold's shoulders. The audience gasped. Harold looked confused. What are you doing? He asked. Steve smiled, tears still in his eyes. That jacket represents every show I've ever done, Steve said. Every laugh, every joke, every moment. But none of them matter as much as what you just shared. So I want you to have it. I want you to remember that your story matters. That your son's life mattered. And that forgiveness, that's the most powerful thing any of us can give. Harold broke down. He hugged Steve again, this time sobbing into his shoulder. The entire Parker family rushed the stage and wrapped their arms around both of them. The Morgans joined in. The audience was a mess. Even the stone-faced camera operators were wiping their eyes. It was no longer a game show. It was a church. A moment of collective grief and healing happening live on television. When the taping finally wrapped, Steve didn't leave the stage right away. He stayed with the Parker family. He talked to Harold's grandchildren. He asked about their lives, their dreams, their memories of their father. He signed autographs. He took pictures. But more than anything, he listened. Because that's what Steve Harvey does when the cameras stop rolling. He shows up. He cares. He makes people feel seen. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. 3 weeks later, Harold received a package at his home in Ohio. Inside was a letter from Steve Harvey, handwritten, along with a framed photo of the two of them hugging on stage. The letter said, "Harold, thank you for reminding me why I do what I do. Your son would be proud of the man you've become. Keep that jacket close. It's yours now. And so is my friendship. Anytime you need me, I'm a phone call away. Love, Steve." But that wasn't all. Inside the package was also a check. A personal donation from Steve Harvey to a grief counseling center in Ohio, made in honor of Harold's son. The note attached said, "So that other families can find the forgiveness you found. And so that your son's legacy keeps helping people long after we're all gone." Harold framed the letter. He hung the jacket in his living room. And every time someone asks him about it, he tells them the story. Not just the story of what happened on Family Feud, but the story of what forgiveness gave him. 3 months with his son. 3 months of grace. 3 months that, in the end, meant more than all the years of distance that came before. Steve Harvey never forgot that episode. In interviews since, he's called it one of the most profound moments of his career. "People think this show is about jokes and money," he said in one interview. But it's not. It's about people. It's about reminding folks that family is everything. And that forgiveness is the glue that holds it all together. Harold taught me that. And I'll never forget it. The episode aired 6 weeks later. And when it did, the response was overwhelming. Millions of people watched. Thousands commented. People shared their own stories of loss, of estrangement, of finding their way back to the people they love. Harold's moment became more than just a moment. It became a movement. A reminder that it's never too late to forgive. Never too late to heal. Never too late to say the things that matter. That jacket still hangs in Harold's living room. And every time he looks at it, he remembers. Not just the day on Family Feud, but the 3 months he got with his son. The gift of forgiveness. The power of grace. And the man on that stage who stopped everything just to listen. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because at the end of the day, Family Feud is just a game. But what Harold shared that day wasn't a game. It was a truth. A truth that every family needs to hear. That love isn't enough on its own. That you need forgiveness too. That family isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Being honest. Being willing to admit when you're wrong and to forgive when you're hurt. Steve Harvey didn't just host a game show that day. He held space for healing. He gave a grieving father a platform to honor his son. He gave a family a moment they'll never forget. And he gave millions of people watching at home a reason to pick up the phone, to send the text, to have the hard conversation, to choose forgiveness over pride. That's the meaning of family. Not perfection. Not pretending. But showing up. Forgiving. And holding on to the people you love with everything you have, for as long as you can. Because time is short. And the moments that matter most are the ones where we choose love over hurt, grace over grudges, and forgiveness over everything else. Harold Parker taught us that. Steve Harvey made sure the world heard it. And that jacket hanging in an Ohio living room? It's not just fabric. It's proof that forgiveness changes everything. Years later, Harold still gets letters. From strangers who watched the episode. From families who were estranged and found their way back. From sons and daughters who called their fathers after decades of silence. From parents who finally said the words, "I'm sorry," to their children. Harold keeps every single letter in a box beneath his bed. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, he takes them out and reads them. And he cries. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Because his pain became someone else's hope. His brokenness became their bridge back home. Steve Harvey said it best in a podcast years later. That episode changed me. I realized that this platform I have isn't just about entertainment. It's about healing. It's about giving people permission to be human, to be vulnerable, to forgive and be forgiven. Harold gave me that gift. He reminded me that every single person who walks onto that stage has a story. And sometimes, the greatest thing I can do is stop the show and let them tell it. The Parker family never won the cash prize that day. But they won something far more valuable. They won a moment frozen in time. A reminder that their father, their grandfather, had the courage to speak a truth that millions needed to hear. And that Steve Harvey, a man who could have moved on to the next question, chose instead to honor that truth with silence, with tears, with his jacket, and with his heart.